Tonight's story drifts back to the quiet beginnings of human civilization, to a time when the earliest cities rose from riverbanks and the first written symbols etched the rhythms of daily life. It follows the slow, gradual development of a system that shaped much of the ancient world, the earliest forms of slavery. This narrative traces how forced labor quietly emerged, why societies believed they needed it, how life unfolded within these early systems, and how growing cities transformed simple dependence into structured hierarchy. The journey begins in calm landscapes of long-forgotten eras, where fields, canals, and temples revealed the first silent outlines of servitude. In the earliest ages of settled life, long before kingdoms carved borders or empires stretched across continents, small clusters of dwellings gathered near rivers that rose and fell with the seasons. These landscapes carried a quiet rhythm, the soft unfolding of dawn over plains of grain, the low murmur of wind moving through reeds, and the distant sound of water shifting through irrigation channels that kept early communities alive. In these places, life followed a slow, repetitive pattern, shaped by the demands of soil, weather, and the fragile stability of each harvest. The first cities emerged gradually, shimmering as clusters of mud brick walls and narrow lanes where smoke drifted gently from hearths. In these new settlements, labor became the foundation upon which everything else rested. Fields needed tending when the sun was still low. Canals needed clearing before heat settled on the earth. Storage houses required a steady flow of grain to prepare for the lean months. Over time, the needs of these growing centers stretched beyond what families alone could provide, and the pressures of early survival nudged societies toward systems that organized and controlled work on an expanding scale. The world of these early people was shaped by long days under the open sky, by the calm persistence of routine, and by the necessity of cooperation. Yet, as communities grew larger and more complex, unequal patterns of work began to take shape. Those born into certain households found themselves performing the same quiet tasks day after day, governed by expectations passed down through generations. Others, captured during conflicts or taken as repayment for debts, became part of households in ways that blended duty, dependence, and obligation. Across river valleys from Mesopotamia to early Egypt and beyond, written records began to appear, simple marks pressed into clay tablets, noting grain rations, labor assignments, and household roles. These writings offer a glimpse into a world where labor was meticulously documented and quietly divided. In this slow and steady development, the earliest forms of slavery emerged not with sudden violence, but through a gradual accumulation of needs, customs, and economic pressures. As the ancient world took shape, the lives of those bound to labor became interwoven with the cycles of seasons, the rise of early temples, and the quiet authority of local rulers. Their stories unfolded in the shadows of growing cities, where the hum of daily work echoed against walls rising higher each year. This narrative enters that world, tracing the calm but weighty foundations of early servitude. The earliest landscapes of human settlement offered both opportunity and hardship in equal measure. Villages formed near fertile riverbanks where soil, enriched by seasonal floods, promised abundant harvests if tended with care. Yet this promise came with demanding rhythms. Irrigation channels required constant maintenance, their walls eroding whenever the water surged too strongly. Fields needed clearing after each flood, their surfaces littered with silt, reeds and driftwood carried from miles upstream. The tasks were endless and repetitive, grinding gently against those who performed them day after day. As communities expanded and populations grew, the need for steady labor outpaced what family groups alone could manage. Seasonal cycles offered little room for delay. Missed tasks invited hunger in the months that followed. The earliest forms of forced labor arose quietly from this pressure, shaped less by cruelty than by necessity perceived through the lens of survival. Households took in workers who owed debts, war captives brought from neighboring villages, and individuals who found themselves with few options after poor harvests or illness. These arrangements were rarely formal at first, unfolding instead through customary obligations passed from one generation to the next. Daily life for these early laborers began long before the first light reached the horizon. In the cool pre-dawn air, before the day's heat settled over the land, they gathered near fields or storage yards where overseers arranged the morning tasks. The quiet rustle of tools, the soft thud of footsteps along compacted paths, and the distant calls of early rising animals formed the backdrop of their mornings. Work unfolded slowly as light spread across the plain, clearing weeds, carrying baskets of earth, shaping mud bricks, or tending irrigation ditches where the water flowed with faint rhythmic sounds. Food was simple and often scarce. Most meals consisted of coarse grain, ground by hand, baked into thick bread, or boiled into porridge. The scent of cooked grain mingled with the earthy fragrance of damp soil, forming a sensory tapestry that defined their days. Fresh vegetables were reserved for fortunate moments. Fruit, when available, appeared only during certain seasons. Meat was rare, and when it did arrive, it came in small portions, saved for festivals or ritual offerings. The heat of midday pressed heavily upon the land, slowing movement but never halting it. Labor continued in shaded areas or inside storage structures where the air remained still and warm. Tools made from stone or wood required constant repair. Baskets frayed from repeated use. Ropes needed twisting anew. These cycles of work shaped the lives of those bound to service, creating a rhythm that left little space for rest beyond brief pauses marked by shared water or quiet conversation. Despite the monotony, early slavery existed within a spectrum of conditions. Some households integrated their workers into daily life, offering modest shelter and basic care in exchange for permanent labor. Other arrangements were stricter, with workers housed separately and assigned tasks with little variation. In all cases, autonomy was limited, their days defined by the needs of those who controlled the land. The softness of dawn, the heat of midday, and the cool winds of evening flowed around them, but the pattern of their responsibilities remained constant. As cities emerged, the demands for labor intensified. The construction of walls, granaries, and temples required a steady supply of workers capable of lifting heavy loads, shaping raw materials, and performing repetitive tasks. These endeavors often spanned seasons or years, drawing on a labor force that endured long hours beneath open skies or within dim, enclosed spaces where dust drifted lazily in slanted beams of sunlight. Their contribution formed the backbone of early civilizations, though their names rarely appeared in records beyond ration lists or labor assignments. Social hierarchy grew slowly around these systems. Those who controlled land and resources viewed laborers as essential but subordinate, granting them little say in the workings of the household or the community. Their lives were governed by decisions made far above them, shaped by the flow of grain, the timing of floods, and the ambitions of those who sought to expand their holdings. In this quiet acceptance of structured inequality, early slavery settled into the fabric of ancient society. Hardship, though pervasive, was rarely acknowledged in dramatic terms. It appeared instead as a persistent weight, a constant presence felt through tired limbs, worn hands, and routines that stretched unbroken across years. Illness, when it arrived, removed workers from the fields but offered little relief. The absence of one pair of hands meant additional work for others. Recovery was slow and often incomplete. Losses, whether through misfortune or circumstance, passed without ceremony, absorbed into the broader flow of daily tasks. Nighttime brought a temporary stillness. After long hours of work, laborers returned to simple shelters built from reeds, mud, or rough wood. The interiors were dimly lit by small oil lamps that flickered gently against earthen walls. The air carried the scent of smoke, grain, and packed earth. Conversations were quiet, consisting of low exchanges or moments of shared silence. Outside, insects hummed softly, and distant sounds from animals or shifting water filled the night. Even in these moments of rest, the presence of obligation lingered. Fields awaited tending with the next sunrise. Tools lay ready for repair. Storage areas required organizing as grain flowed in and out with the changing seasons. The demands of early civilization rarely paused, and neither did the responsibilities placed upon those who labored within it. As generations passed, these systems became normalized through custom and written law. Tablets recorded the status of individuals, listing them among livestock or stored goods. Rations were distributed according to strict schedules. Debts accumulated quietly, carrying families into cycles of labor that stretched across lifetimes. Slavery, once an informal response to immediate need, became an institution supported by tradition, economy, and the steady expansion of cities. Through all of this, the world around them remained vast and indifferent. Fields flourished or failed according to weather. Rivers rose and fell. Temples cast long shadows at sunrise and glowed softly at dusk. Laborers moved through these landscapes as essential threads in the broader tapestry, their presence shaping the earliest chapters of human civilization. The expansion of early cities brought changes that unfolded with a slow and inevitable rhythm. As settlements grew into larger communities, the reliance on bound labor deepened in ways that felt ordinary rather than extraordinary. Fields expanded outward in wide patterns determined by seasonal floods, and new irrigation channels traced deliberate lines across the soft earth. Workers tended these channels each morning, smoothing their edges where water had worn them down overnight. The air around the rivers carried a faint coolness at dawn, mixed with the earthy scent of wet soil and the distant rustling of reeds moving gently in the breeze. Construction in emerging cities introduced another layer of quiet labor. Temple foundations required countless bricks shaped from clay gathered near riverbanks. Workers pressed the clay with practiced motions, leaving faint finger patterns that dried slowly under the sun. Stonecutters chipped blocks in measured strokes that echoed softly across open courtyards. Dust floated lazily in warm air, illuminated by thin shafts of sunlight slipping through partially built walls. Nothing progressed quickly. Each structure rose through the calm persistence of hands repeating the same motions day after day. Workshops formed small pockets of activity within these communities. potters shaped vessels used for storing grain and water, their wheels turning with steady, understated cadence. Weavers worked beneath shaded awnings, drawing threads through simple looms to create cloth needed for garments and household goods. The sounds in these spaces were subdued, the quiet scraping of clay tools, the soft thrum of stretched fibers, the gentle tapping of wood against wood. Even in labor, the overall atmosphere felt muted, as if time itself stretched with deliberate patience. Domestic environments created yet another setting where bound workers moved through carefully structured routines. Before sunrise, fires were coaxed back into life with dry reeds and scraps of kindling. Steam rose from pots where grain simmered slowly, filling rooms with a warm, faintly sweet aroma. Water jars needed refilling from nearby wells, and simple tools required cleaning or minor repair. The interiors of these dwellings remained dim, lit mostly by the glow of small oil lamps or by the muted daylight filtering through reed mats hung in doorways. Seasonal shifts added variety to the tasks without altering their overall tone. During the warmest months, distant mirages shimmered across open fields, making the land appear to ripple gently beneath the sun. Laborers adapted by beginning work earlier, moving through the cool pre-dawn air before heat settled heavily over the landscape. In cooler seasons, soil hardened and slowed the pace of agricultural tasks, redirecting attention toward preparing storage areas, repairing structures, or crafting tools needed for the coming year. Each season imposed its character upon the land and the people who worked it, shaping their days through subtle, continuous change. Within these cycles, hardship existed as a quiet foundation. Fatigue accumulated gradually in limbs that had performed the same actions for years. The boundaries of each person's life were defined not by dramatic events, but by the repetition of necessary duties. Freedom was limited to brief conversations after dusk, or to silent moments spent watching changing skies. Yet even in these constraints, bonds formed between those who labored side by side. Shared work created shared understanding, and small gestures of cooperation brought a gentle sense of unity. Administrative systems developed alongside the expansion of cities. Clay tablets recorded rations, duties, and household arrangements with precise markings. These records treated labor as part of the natural order of things, listing individuals within inventories that also included livestock, tools, jars of grain, and amounts of oil. The writing did not attempt to convey emotion. It simply reflected the organization of early society, where every resource, human or material, held a designated place within the broader structure. Inequality revealed itself quietly in the physical spaces people inhabited. Larger homes with interior courtyards belonged to those who managed land, trade, or ritual duties. These dwellings offered shade, storage rooms, and cool chambers where the midday heat felt distant. Those who served these households lived in simpler quarters, often sharing small rooms lined with reed mats and coarse blankets. The contrast was not meant to be dramatic. It appeared organically from differing roles within the community, forming a hierarchy that felt as permanent as the rising and setting of the sun. Evenings brought a temporary stillness. After long hours of labor, the landscape shifted into muted tones as the sun faded behind distant hills. Hearth fires glowed softly, casting warm patterns on earthen walls. The sounds of the day fell away, replaced by the faint chorus of insects and the distant call of night birds. In that gentle darkness, the weight of obligation never vanished, but it settled into the background for a time. allowing moments of quiet reflection. Through centuries of repetition, the early systems of bonded labor became ingrained in the framework of civilization. What had begun as a response to necessity slowly transformed into an enduring institution. Fields continued to rely on steady hands, canals continued to draw water across the land, and temples continued to rise through the careful shaping of stone and clay. In this world, slavery existed not as a sudden creation, but as a gradual development, an ever-present undercurrent supporting the growth of the first cities. As the routines of early labor continued to shape the first cities, the quiet patterns of work and obligation settled into the foundations of daily existence. Over generations, these patterns formed an unbroken thread that connected fields, workshops, and households in a single, slow-moving rhythm. The presence of enslaved workers became so intertwined with the functioning of these communities that their contributions, though often unnoticed in formal records, sustained nearly every aspect of life. Their movements echoed through narrow lanes at dawn. Their efforts supported the rising of temples, and their steady hands ensured the flow of grain that fed entire settlements. Within this enduring structure, the lives of individual workers blended into the wider tapestry of society. Most remained anonymous, their stories lost to time, preserved only in subtle traces etched into clay tablets or hinted at through small artifacts uncovered by later generations. Yet occasionally, among these faint impressions, a clearer outline emerges. An individual whose existence offers a window into the lived reality of early servitude. Through these rare glimpses, the broader patterns of the era can be understood not only through landscapes and systems, but also through the quiet journey of a single life moving gently through the world that shaped it. In the heart of one of the earliest cities, amid the winding channels and rising walls, the life of such a figure gradually takes form, illuminated by the faint light of surviving records and the steady imagination of history. Their days unfolded within the same rhythms that governed the entire settlement, yet their experiences reflect a deeper view into the silent beginnings of servitude. It is through this individual, living in the soft dawn of civilization, that the next chapter of the story reveals itself with calm clarity. Soft light filtered through narrow openings in the mud brick walls of the ancient settlement, illuminating dust that drifted gently in the morning air. In one of the growing river cities of early Mesopotamia, where the wide plains met the quiet flow of the Euphrates, the life of a single worker gradually unfolded within the deeper structure of a world still shaping itself. Born into a household already burdened by obligations, this individual entered life beneath the shadow of inherited debt, absorbed into the rhythms of labor long before awareness of choice or freedom could take root. The earliest memories held traces of movement through fields at dawn, the muted warmth of pottery kilns, and the soft murmur of voices carrying through shaded courtyards where elders discussed grain, seasons, and the subtle negotiations of survival. The settlement around this figure expanded each year, its lanes weaving into increasingly complex patterns. New buildings rose slowly, shaped from clay gathered along the riverbanks. Merchants and travelers passed through regularly, bringing baskets of resin, woven cloth, and distant stories that reached the ears of children clustered near the edges of courtyards. Through these faint glimpses of the wider world, a sense of scale gradually emerged, though always distant, always softened by the boundaries of labor. Life unfolded in measured steps, tied closely to the movement of the sun and the decisions of those who managed the household. In youth, the worker was assigned to tasks suited to small hands, gathering kindling from the edges of fields, carrying water in jars that grew heavier with each passing season, and observing older laborers shape raw materials into tools, storage vessels, or simple household goods. The scents of clay, ash, and damp vegetation became familiar markers of the environment, blending with the steady warmth of the earth beneath bare feet. As strength developed, responsibilities expanded, guided not by instruction spoken in haste, but by the quiet demonstration of motions repeated countless times by those who came before. Learning occurred through presence and observation, through the slow absorption of gesture and rhythm. By adolescence, the figure's work centered around the temple district, a space defined by high walls that cast long shadows across packed dirt pathways. Stone fragments echoed faintly beneath careful footsteps, and the hum of activity from within the temple complex created a constant, subtle vibration in the air. Within these walls, tasks ranged from sweeping corridors to transporting offerings or maintaining the fires that burned steadily in ceremonial hearths. Smoke drifted upward in thin, wavering trails, carrying with it the soft scent of aromatic plants and the lingering sweetness of dried fruit occasionally used in rituals. These experiences imparted a sense of calm formality, a recognition that the temple existed as both a spiritual and administrative center, its presence shaping the rhythm of the entire city. Work in the temple brought the worker into contact with scribes, priests, and officials, whose daily responsibilities involved recording transactions, interpreting omens, or conducting ceremonies believed to maintain harmony between humanity and the divine. Though the figure occupied a humble position within this hierarchy, proximity to such individuals provided faint glimpses of the structures that governed city life. Observations accumulated quietly, forming an unspoken understanding of how rations were distributed, how land was managed, and how laws were interpreted. None of these insights altered the boundaries of the worker's existence, yet they offered a deeper awareness of the systems that encircled it. At times, tasks extended beyond the temple grounds into workshops where artisans shaped clay tablets for record-keeping. Soft clay, cool to the touch, bore the impressions of wedge-shaped tools that marked transactions, labor assignments, and grain inventories. The worker often carried freshly inscribed tablets to storage rooms where they would dry slowly beneath filtered sunlight. The feel of the clay left a subtle imprint on the hands, its texture a gentle reminder of the administrative world responsible for organizing every aspect of the city's economy. Within these spaces, the worker witnessed the delicate balance between material need and spiritual obligation, two threads that wove together the identity of early urban life. As years passed, the worker's role shifted gradually from general labor to more specialized duties. Increased strength and skill led to work on construction projects, particularly those associated with expanding the temple's outer buildings. Large stones required careful alignment, clay bricks demanded uniform shaping, and scaffolding needed constant adjustment as structures rose layer by layer. The combination of physical exertion and meticulous precision created a meditative rhythm in the worker's days. Each motion, lifting, smoothing, setting, became part of a longer chain of actions stretching back through generations of builders who had shaped similar structures along the river's banks. The environment surrounding these construction efforts was one of constant, subdued movement. Workers carried materials in woven baskets, their footsteps creating soft patterns in the dust. Overseers marked progress on clay tablets, their reed styluses making faint tapping sounds as they recorded measurements or resource allocations. The sun cast shifting patterns of light and shadow across half-completed walls, emphasizing the gradual, deliberate nature of the work. Breaks offered little rest, yet they provided brief moments to observe the quiet interplay between workers, materials, and the evolving landscape of the city. During quieter seasons, when major projects paused to accommodate agricultural demands, the worker returned to tasks more closely tied to the land. Fields near the river required clearing after floods, their surfaces coated with fresh layers of silt that glistened under early morning light. The scent of wet earth filled the air, mingling with the soft rustle of reeds stirred by wind rolling gently across the plain. These days held a different rhythm, still laborious yet intertwined with natural cycles that offered occasional glimpses of beauty in the simplicity of light reflecting upon water or the distant cry of cranes moving across the sky. The workers' understanding of life broadened as contact with travelers and merchants increased. Stories carried along trade routes revealed distant regions shaped by different customs, landscapes, and deities. Though these tales remained abstract, they offered a sense of connection to a wider world, reinforcing the idea that the city was only one node in an expansive network of human settlement. Shipments of timber from northern regions, copper from the east, and precious stones from faraway mountains arrived with regular frequency, their presence in storerooms adding variation to the city's inventory. Handling these materials, even indirectly, gave the worker a tactile appreciation for the diversity of the ancient world. Over time, bonds formed with other laborers, creating a quiet community bound not by freedom, but by shared experience. Conversations drifted softly through workspaces during brief pauses, carrying memories of family, hopes for gentle seasons, or reflections on familiar routines. These exchanges provided comfort in an environment defined by obligation and repetition, creating small pockets of warmth in otherwise demanding days. The presence of companionship softened the weight of labor, even when tasks remained unchanging. Illness occasionally swept through the city, moving slowly from household to household with the changing winds. When laborers fell sick, their absence was felt in the increased workload of those who remained. Care was modest, simple herbs, cool cloths, or shared portions of food, but the compassion extended among workers provided moments of relief. Recovery brought a quiet sense of renewal, highlighting the resilience required to endure the cycles of hardship and restoration inherent in ancient life. Through seasons of heat, flood, and harvest, the worker's life continued in steady motion. The sense of identity grew not through dramatic events but through familiarity with tools, pathways, and the subtle transformations of the city itself. New buildings rose where open spaces once stood, old walls weathered under sun and wind. The river carved fresh channels as centuries passed. The worker witnessed these shifts with the calm resignation of someone deeply embedded in the fabric of the settlement, aware that time moved forward in a gentle, unbroken stream. The end of the worker's life arrived quietly, as most lives of the era did. No dramatic records captured the final days. No grand rituals marked the passing. Yet, traces remained, impressions left on clay tablets, structures shaped through years of labor, and faint stories passed through generations of workers who continued similar tasks long after the individual was gone. In these subtle legacies, the outline of a single existence contributed to the broader narrative of civilization's rise. This gradual unfolding of one life within the earliest systems of servitude reveals the calm persistence that underpinned ancient society. Through fields, temples, workshops, and modest dwellings, the steady rhythm of labor shaped a world still discovering its own identity, leaving behind a foundation upon which future eras would build. Gentle traces of the ancient world remained hidden beneath layers of earth long after the early cities had faded. Over centuries, shifting riverbeds deposited silt over abandoned fields, dunes crept slowly across forgotten villages, and collapsed walls turned into soft mounds that blended seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. These quiet transformations preserved the memory of early labor in subtle forms. Objects buried in the soil, fragments of pottery scattered across plains, and clay tablets tucked away in sealed rooms where darkness and stillness protected them from decay. Each discovery carried within it a faint whisper of lives lived in steady repetition, reflecting not the turmoil of dramatic events, but the persistence of daily existence. The earliest hints of structured servitude emerged in these artifacts, revealing a world where labor was carefully recorded and methodically organized. Clay tablets, hardened by time, bore impressions of wedge-shaped markings arranged in neat, deliberate rows. Some listed quantities of grain distributed to households. Others detailed assignments of workers to fields, canals, or temple precincts. The tablets carried no emotion in their tone, only the quiet precision of a society learning to manage itself through written record. Their surfaces, textured by ancient hands, held the faint warmth of history, the marks pressed into them still visible after thousands of years. Occasionally, tablets were found in clusters, stored in rooms that once functioned as administrative archives. These rooms, often constructed with slightly thicker walls to shield their contents from heat and moisture, revealed the bureaucratic heart of early civilization. Within their remains, archaeologists uncovered carefully arranged piles of tablets, some broken and others intact, lying exactly where scribes had placed them before the rooms collapsed or were abandoned. The stillness of these spaces, preserved through time, carried an atmosphere of purposeful quiet, as if the air within them had never fully surrendered the presence of those who once walked their floors. Outside the walls of these archives, remnants of workshops provided further insight into the world of early labor. Fragments of kiln structures showed where potters had shaped clay vessels used to store food, water, or oil. Scorched earth surrounding the kilns hinted at repeated firing, each cycle leaving a layer of ash that settled gradually over the ground. Stone tools, chipped through years of use, lay scattered near unfinished objects or among piles of broken pottery discarded when flaws appeared during the shaping process. These remains painted a picture of calm industry, not marked by haste or urgency, but by the steady rhythm of hands that practiced the same crafts day after day. In some regions, traces of early housing emerged in the form of shallow depressions where structures once stood. These dwellings, modest in size and simple in design, left behind outlines of walls formed from mud bricks now crumbled into soft mounds. Hearths appeared as darkened patches of earth, their edges marked by stones arranged carefully to support pots or to contain small fires. The faint scent of ancient ash no longer lingered, yet the pattern of the hearths carried memories of meals prepared in quiet repetition, offering a glimpse into the domestic side of early servitude. One of the most evocative archaeological discoveries connected to early slavery came from the remains of large granaries built near temples and administrative buildings. These granaries, sometimes preserved as deep pits lined with clay or constructed as raised platforms with thick supporting walls, contained grains that had hardened into compact masses over time. The storerooms revealed the importance of organized labor in sustaining urban life. The consistent temperature within the structures suggested that workers regularly monitored their contents, ensuring that supplies remained abundant enough to support priests, officials, artisans, and laborers alike. The smooth surfaces of these storage areas bore faint marks of baskets and tools used to distribute grain with measured precision. Irrigation systems formed another vital area of archaeological interest. Long channels carved into the earth stretched across ancient landscapes, their outlines visible even after centuries of erosion. Some channels were reinforced with layers of clay or lined with stones arranged in gentle curves to guide water efficiently. Workers had shaped these systems with deliberate care, their efforts reflected in the evenness of the channels and the subtle variations in depth that regulated water flow. The remains of small sluice gates appeared near branching points, constructed from timber or stone to divert water into fields depending on seasonal needs. These features, though worn and partially reclaimed by nature, demonstrated the essential role of bound labor in maintaining agricultural productivity. Scattered across certain sites were artifacts that suggested moments of quiet personal significance among the enslaved population. Small figurines carved from bone or clay, simple beads fashioned from shell or stone, and fragments of pottery etched with delicate patterns hinted at expressions of identity or belief. These objects, found among domestic refuse or near living quarters, revealed that despite the constraints of their lives, early workers found ways to create beauty or meaning within the limits of their circumstances. Each artifact served as a quiet testament to individual presence, subtle signs of thought, care, and creativity within a world defined by obligation. Some regions revealed evidence of early burial practices associated with enslaved individuals. Graves were modest, often marked by shallow pits or simple coverings of stones. Artifacts placed with the bodies were sparse, a small vessel, a tool, or a personal ornament, suggesting that while their social status limited the resources available to them, they still received gestures of respect in death. The soil around these sites carried traces of ancient decay, softened by time into rich layers that preserved the shape of burial pits. These remains offered a glimpse into the quiet dignity that persisted even within systems of bondage. Temples, standing at the centers of many early settlements, provided some of the most profound archaeological insights. Their foundations revealed layers of construction built atop older structures, suggesting that sacred spaces were continually expanded or rebuilt through generations. In these layers, archaeologists found inscriptions that mentioned festivals, offerings, and rosters of workers assigned to temple service. The inscriptions emphasized order and continuity, reinforcing the idea that temples function not only as religious centers, but also as administrative anchors where labor was coordinated with ceremonial needs. The presence of enslaved individuals within these systems was evident through recorded tasks such as carrying water, maintaining fires, or preparing ritual materials. Even more enigmatic were the remains of ancient transport routes, long paths etched into the landscape through repeated use. These routes connected villages, fields, and cities, forming a network upon which goods, people, and ideas traveled. The compacted earth along these paths bore the imprint of generations of footsteps, carts, and animals. Though few physical objects remained along these routes, their existence revealed the movement of laborers who carried loads across distances, linking different parts of early societies through steady, unbroken motion. The landscape itself became a kind of memory, holding the imprint of those who walked its lines under sun, rain, and starlight. Near riverbanks, remains of docking areas appeared where boats had once been loaded with grain, clay, or other goods. Wooden posts, long since decayed, left darkened patches in the soil, while scattered fragments of rope or woven baskets indicated that these sites were hubs of activity. The gentle lapping of water against the shore would have mingled with the steady creaking of boats as workers transferred cargo. These scenes, though quiet now, once echoed with the subdued coordination of early commerce, an economy built upon calm persistence. Across all these archaeological remnants, one theme emerged consistently: the centrality of human labor, often compelled in sustaining early civilization. The absence of dramatic artifacts or grand inscriptions underscored the nature of this world. The lives of those who worked within it unfolded in patterns too ordinary to be recorded in epic tales, yet too essential to be forgotten entirely. Their presence lingered in the grooves of irrigation channels, in the worn surfaces of tablets, in the soot-darkened patches of ancient hearths, and in the foundations of structures that gradually merged with the earth. These subtle traces formed a mosaic of existence shaped by continuity, endurance, and the quiet acceptance of routines. Through the patient work of archaeology, these fragments allowed the contours of early servitude to reappear, not as a story of violent upheaval, but as a gentle reflection on the foundations of organized society. The slow uncovering of these remnants offered a window into a world defined by the measured rhythms of labor and the long passage of time, where each small effort contributed to the rise of civilizations that would one day become the subjects of written history. The final traces of that distant world rested quietly beneath accumulated centuries, their presence softened by the slow patience of time. As the earth settled over the remnants of ancient labor, the rhythms that once defined those early lives faded into a gentle hum within the archaeological record. Clay tablets cracked along their edges, yet still carried the impressions of careful hands. Pottery fragments, worn by dust and weather, retained faint curves shaped by artisans who had long since vanished. Even the foundations of forgotten buildings, reduced to low mounds and faint outlines, held the enduring memory of footsteps that once passed through them day after day. Through these subtle remains, the life of a single worker became a symbol of countless others whose stories were never written, but whose presence quietly shaped the course of civilization. In the stillness of these findings, a different kind of legacy emerged, one defined not by triumph or tragedy, but by the steady persistence of ordinary tasks performed across lifetimes. The workers' experiences, though unrecorded in official histories, lingered in the texture of the earth, in the worn stones along ancient pathways, and in the soot-darkened patches of long-cooled hearths. These impressions revealed a society built upon routines that unfolded with unhurried regularity, carried forward by those whose hands sustained the earliest temples, fields, and households. Their world, though distant, felt close in its quiet repetition, its reliance on patient endurance, and its simple acceptance of time's ongoing movement. As the narrative of this single life drew to a gentle close, it left behind a sense of continuity that extended far beyond individual years. The passage of time transformed labor into memory, memory into artifact, and artifact into a quiet form of understanding. What remained was not the struggle itself, but the atmosphere of a civilization rising slowly through the efforts of people whose names were never carved into stone. Their contributions, like the soft accumulation of silt along a riverbank, shaped the foundations upon which later societies would build their own stories. In this lingering stillness, the early world of servitude settled into its place within history, not as an isolated tale, but as a quiet beginning woven into the larger tapestry of human development. And from these ancient impressions, delicate and enduring, another layer of understanding emerged, one that invited a deeper exploration, not of individual lives, but of the beliefs, mysteries, and cultural practices that surrounded them. The world that supported such early rhythms did not exist solely in labor and routine. It was also a world shaped by ritual, by symbolism, by the unseen forces that early civilizations believed were woven into the land, the sky, and the quiet spaces between. As the final echoes of this personal history faded into the background, the wider fabric of ancient thought began to rise gently into view, ready to reveal the deeper mysteries that guided the earliest societies and gave meaning to the patterns of their days. From these ancient impressions, delicate and enduring, another layer of understanding emerged, one shaped not by the routines of daily labor, but by the beliefs and quiet mysteries that gave meaning to life in the earliest civilizations. Beneath the work that sustained the first cities, a deeper world existed, woven from symbols, rituals, and stories passed between generations. These beliefs formed the silent architecture of early society, influencing how communities understood the land, the river, the sky, and the unseen forces thought to reside within them. The archaeological record, though fragmentary, offered soft hints of this inner landscape, revealing traces of a cultural world that moved steadily alongside the rhythms of labor. Clay figurines discovered in modest dwellings indicated a form of household reverence, small objects shaped with care from local materials. Their surfaces carried simple markings, lines etched to suggest garments, dots indicating eyes, faint patterns hinting at hair or jewelry. Each figurine embodied a presence believed to offer protection or guidance, placed upon low shelves or near hearths where the warmth of firelight flickered against their forms. Though their exact purpose remained elusive, they suggested a belief in forces beyond the visible world, forces that interacted gently with the cycles of family life and domestic work. In larger temple complexes, archaeological discoveries revealed a more elaborate spiritual structure. Stone altars, their surfaces worn smooth through repeated offerings, stood in quiet chambers where light filtered through narrow openings high in the walls. These chambers echoed faintly with the traces of ancient ceremonies, rituals performed not with spectacle, but with steady reverence shaped by centuries of tradition. Offerings of grain, oil, or fragrant plants left residue that lingered in the porous surfaces of the altars, subtle evidence of acts meant to maintain harmony between the human realm and the unseen. Symbols appeared frequently in these sacred spaces, inscribed on clay tablets, carved into stone, or painted upon plaster walls. Some symbols represented natural elements, rivers, mountains, the sun's path across the sky. Others referred to celestial bodies observed during long nights when stars shimmered above the plains with steady stillness. These symbols formed part of a broader narrative through which early societies organized their understanding of existence. Their meanings could not always be recovered, yet their presence conveyed a sense of quiet continuity, a reassurance that life moved according to patterns recognized and honored by generations. Burial sites added further depth to this cultural world. In shallow graves lined with stone or clay, bodies were positioned with care, often accompanied by modest offerings. Simple vessels, beads, or tools suggested beliefs regarding a journey beyond the visible realm. The arrangements of these graves reflected a gentle respect for the dead, an acknowledgement that life extended in ways not entirely understood. The earth around these sites carried faint signs of ancient ceremonies, disturbed soil, scattered remnants of organic materials, or stones arranged in patterns no longer interpretable. These delicate traces hinted at rituals performed in soft twilight or early dawn, when the air hung still and the boundary between the living and the unseen felt thin. Ritual objects discovered near water sources suggested that rivers held profound spiritual significance. Stones carved into rounded shapes, their surfaces smoothed by repeated handling, were found near ancient banks where communities once gathered. Such objects may have served as offerings to the spirits believed to inhabit the flowing water, or as symbols of renewal tied to the seasonal floods that replenished the land. The journey of water through the landscape mirrored the movement of life itself, its rise and fall, its quiet persistence, and thus became a natural focal point for belief. In remote regions, rock carvings revealed another dimension of ancient cultural thought. Carved into cliff faces or exposed stone outcrops, these images depicted animals, human figures, or abstract shapes arranged in sequences that suggested stories or rituals. The carvings remained exposed to sun, wind, and rain for millennia, yet their lines retained a clarity that reflected the patient work of early artisans. The scenes they portrayed carried a sense of quiet observation. Hunters moving through open landscapes, animals grazing beneath expansive skies, or figures gathered in what may have been ceremonial postures. These images provided glimpses of a symbolic world intertwined with the natural environment, a world where meaning was drawn from the patterns of daily life. Among the most intriguing discoveries were objects whose purposes remained entirely unknown. Spheres carved from stone, their surfaces polished and symmetrical, lay buried in clusters, suggesting intentional placement. Small tablets inscribed with undeciphered symbols presented linguistic puzzles that defied interpretation. Unusual vessels with narrow necks and broad bases hinted at specific rituals or preparations now lost to time. These objects served as gentle reminders that the ancient world held layers of understanding beyond modern comprehension, layers shaped by beliefs that guided lives with steady influence. Some remnants reflected a belief in celestial cycles. In certain regions, excavations uncovered circular arrangements of stones aligned with solstices or equinoxes. These alignments suggested that early societies observed the movement of the sun with careful attention, recognizing patterns that guided agricultural cycles and ritual timing. The stones, though weathered and partially buried, maintained their positions with quiet resilience. Their presence reflected a gentle reverence for the heavens, marking seasonal transitions that shaped the rhythm of ancient life. Ceremonial pathways uncovered in several settlements offered yet another perspective on early cultural practices. These pathways, often associated with temples or burial grounds, were marked by compacted earth or arranged stones. Their surfaces bore faint traces of repeated footsteps, suggesting a long history of processions conducted with measured pace. The routes led through open courtyards, between tall walls, or across natural features such as streams or fields. Their purpose remained partially obscured, yet their presence implied traditions rooted in communal experience, events that brought people together in quiet reflection. Even the ways early communities oriented their dwellings carried cultural meaning. Houses aligned with cardinal directions, courtyards positioned to catch morning light, and storage rooms kept in cooler, shaded areas suggested a knowledge of natural cycles embedded within architecture. These choices reflected an understanding of the world shaped not only by practical concerns, but by symbolic associations tied to sun, wind, and seasonal change. Archaeologists observed these patterns with gentle curiosity, recognizing that each architectural choice reflected beliefs passed through generations. As new discoveries emerged, the archaeological record revealed connections between distant regions. Similar figurines, inscriptions, or burial practices appeared across landscapes separated by mountains, deserts, or rivers. These similarities hinted at shared ideas carried through trade routes or migratory paths, suggesting a quiet exchange of stories and beliefs between early cultures. This diffusion of ideas occurred not through rapid conquest, but through gradual contact shaped by the slow movement of goods, people, and knowledge across great distances. Through this expanding view of ancient culture, a deeper picture began to form, one that complemented the earlier understanding of labor and servitude. The world that sustained the rhythms of daily work was also a world filled with symbols, rituals, and mysteries that offered meaning beyond the surface of life. The presence of these cultural elements softened the edges of hardship, providing a framework through which communities interpreted the challenges and cycles of their existence. Belief became a gentle companion to labor, woven into the foundation of early civilization like a quiet melody drifting beneath the rhythm of tools and footsteps. Across time, these cultural impressions settled into the earth with the same gentle patience that preserved the remnants of fields, workshops, and dwellings. What survived formed a mosaic of memory, shaped not by conquest or catastrophe, but by continuity. In the silence of archaeological sites, within the layers of soil that protected ancient artifacts, the spiritual and symbolic world of early humanity remained present in subtle, enduring ways. Through these lingering traces, the ancient cultures that once thrived along rivers, plains, and hillsides continued to speak softly, their stories carried forward by the steady work of those who uncovered them. The carved stones, The quiet symbols and the gentle arrangements of once sacred objects suggested that meaning in the ancient world did not rely upon elaborate monuments or dramatic rituals, but instead rested within small gestures repeated over generations. Some of these gestures echoed faintly through the placement of stones around hearths, the orientation of doorways toward sunrise, or the simple act of leaving a shaped figurine near the entrance of a dwelling. These practices, though modest, formed part of a larger cultural fabric that helped early societies navigate uncertainty, hardship, and the slow unfolding of each season. The earth preserved these traces as soft impressions, allowing later observers to sense the continuity of belief that accompanied the quiet rhythms of ancient life. In certain regions, layers of soil revealed the presence of ancient festivals, once celebrated with modest gatherings. Circular clearings, bordered by stones worn smooth, indicated places where communities may have assembled at specific times of year. Scattered remnants of burned plant material suggested offerings made symbolically to mark transitions between seasons, harvests, or celestial events. These gatherings were likely understated, built around shared meals, music played on simple instruments, or chanting that rose gently into evening air. Though the details remained indefinite, the remnants reflected a desire for unity and connection, a need to reaffirm bonds within communities shaped by long hours of collective labor. Further insights emerged from fragments of early writing found near administrative and ceremonial centers. While many inscriptions recorded practical matters, others hinted at mythic narratives or prayers recited during rituals. The symbols evoked images of distant mountains, life-giving rivers, and celestial beings believed to influence the fates of households and harvests. Though the full meaning of these texts often remained beyond reach, their careful arrangement suggested reverence. Each stroke pressed into soft clay carried intention, revealing how language served not only as a tool of record, but also as a vessel for belief. Some discoveries pointed toward early healing practices. In small storage rooms adjacent to ancient dwellings, archaeologists recovered remnants of dried herbs, crushed minerals, and ceramic vessels containing traces of plant oils. These items indicated that early societies developed systems of care shaped by observation of the natural world. Healing rituals likely blended practical knowledge with spiritual belief, as certain plants were associated with protective spirits or forces thought to aid recovery. The presence of such objects revealed a quiet compassion threaded through communities where hardship remained common, and care was offered through simple, steady actions. Other sites contained evidence of divination practices. Shards of pottery bearing unusual markings, small bones with patterned scoring, and bits of charred material arranged in distinctive ways suggested attempts to interpret signs from the environment. These practices were likely performed by individuals recognized for their sensitivity or experience, serving communities by offering reassurance or guidance during uncertain times. The tools of divination, though modest in form, represented an enduring human desire to make sense of events, to find meaning in natural patterns, and to seek harmony with forces believed to lie just beyond perception. Across many regions, archaeological layers revealed the gradual refinement of artistic expression. Early decorative motifs appeared on pottery, textiles, and carved tools, often reflecting themes drawn from nature. Spirals evoked cycles of growth and decline, while wave-like lines suggested movement of water or wind. Animal imagery appeared frequently. Birds etched with delicate outlines, fish simplified into flowing forms, and cattle rendered with steady, confident strokes. These designs were not merely ornamental. They expressed the relationship between communities and the natural environment that sustained them. Over time, as artistic traditions matured, more complex motifs emerged, revealing the evolution of creativity within the boundaries of ancient life. Sites associated with early education offered hints of how knowledge passed between generations. Clay tablets containing repeated symbols, practice signs, or copied texts suggested that some individuals, likely the children of administrators or priests, received formal instruction. The gently curved impressions of beginners' marks testified to long hours spent learning the shapes of early writing. These lessons unfolded in quiet rooms where reeds rustled softly. Clay carried the faint smell of riverbanks, and the steady pace of repetition built skills essential for administration and ritual. Though most of the population acquired knowledge through observation and experience rather than formal schooling, the existence of these learning spaces indicated the beginnings of structured intellectual life. In larger temple complexes, discoveries revealed spaces once used for music or ritual sound. Clay rattles, fragments of simple drums, and pipes made from hollowed reeds suggested that sound played a role in ceremonies and gatherings. These instruments likely produced tones that drifted gently through courtyards or echoed softly against stone walls, contributing to an atmosphere of calm reverence. The rhythms created by such instruments may have complemented chants or recitations, weaving sound into the spiritual fabric of ancient culture. The presence of these objects offered a glimpse into the sensory world of rituals, where sound, light, and movement merged into quiet expressions of belief. Occasionally, archaeologists uncovered personal items that suggested a sense of introspection among early societies. Small stones polished through repeated handling, pieces of shell kept as tokens, or intricately made amulets indicated that individuals sought comfort or meaning in tangible forms. These items, often found in dwellings or near burial sites, carried traces of touch, reflecting their importance to those who possessed them. Their significance, whether religious, emotional, or practical, added depth to the understanding of ancient lives, revealing how people navigated the unseen aspects of existence through objects held close. Even the arrangement of settlements suggested cultural meaning. Some communities were organized around central courtyards where gatherings could occur, while others expanded outward from temples or administrative centers. Paths connecting dwellings formed organic patterns shaped by the movement of people through daily routines. The placement of wells, orchards, or communal ovens reflected shared priorities and traditions. These spatial arrangements revealed how culture guided both physical and social organization, shaping the environment in ways that aligned with belief, memory, and practical need. As these discoveries accumulated, they formed a gentle composite portrait of ancient society, one in which work and belief existed side by side, woven into daily life with understated continuity. The mysteries revealed by archaeology did not emerge as sudden revelations, but as soft layers slowly brought to light through careful excavation and patient study. Each artifact, fragment, or structural trace contributed to the broader story of how early communities understood themselves, their world, and the forces that guided them. Though the meanings of many objects and practices remained elusive, their presence offered a quiet reassurance that ancient lives were shaped by depth, complexity, and a constant search for harmony. Through these remnants, the cultural spirit of early civilizations lingered, preserved not in written accounts, but in the enduring silence of the earth itself. As layers of soil continued to yield their quiet revelations, a clearer understanding emerged of how ancient communities wove meaning into their surroundings. Every fragment, no matter how small, carried its own weight within the history of belief. The earth preserved tokens of rituals performed in the hush of early mornings, vessels that once held offerings shaped with careful hands, and stones inscribed with symbols meant to speak across the boundary between the seen and unseen. These discoveries suggested that early societies found reassurance in patterns that extended beyond the practical demands of labor, grounding their lives in cycles that reflected the slow turning of the seasons and the steady movement of celestial bodies overhead. The existence of ritual spaces, domestic altars, and symbolic ornaments showed how belief permeated the quiet routines of ancient life. Nothing appeared abrupt or elaborate. The spiritual world unfolded with the same deliberate calm that characterized work in fields, workshops, and temples. Ceremonies rose and faded with gentle familiarity, shaped by the rhythm of communal memory rather than dramatic proclamation. The people of this early world seemed to seek continuity rather than spectacle, locating meaning in repetition, in the soft glow of firelight falling on carved figurines, and in the lingering scent of offerings placed carefully upon worn stone. Even the mysteries that remained unsolved contributed to a sense of tranquility. Objects without clear purpose, symbols whose meanings had drifted beyond reach, and architectural patterns that resisted interpretation invited contemplation rather than urgency. Their ambiguity was not disruptive. It allowed the ancient world to remain partly veiled, preserving a sense of depth that stretched far beyond the visible record. The unknown became a gentle reminder of the vastness of early thought, of worlds imagined in times when writing was scarce and memory carried stories across generations. In this quiet accumulation of evidence, the ancient landscape appeared not solely as a place of labor and survival, but as one shaped by reflection, ritual, and an understated reverence for forces that surrounded everyday life. The beliefs of early societies did not dominate their world with grandeur or spectacle. Instead, they moved softly alongside the rhythms of their days, mirroring the steady flow of rivers, the slow unfurling of dawnlight, and the quiet descent of night across the plains. The cultural and spiritual life of these communities settled gently into the archaeological record, waiting to be uncovered piece by piece in the stillness of later centuries. And as the final layers of this ancient cultural tapestry came into view, another perspective began to rise in its wake, one shaped not by ritual objects or symbolic patterns, but by the contrasting world of those who occupied the higher tiers of early society. Their dwellings, their customs, and their rhythms of life formed a different landscape altogether, one defined by resources, decisions, and comforts that stood apart from the routines of ordinary laborers. As the ancient mysteries settled back into the quiet earth, the contours of this elevated world emerged with equal gentleness, ready to reveal how power, privilege, and serenity shaped the lives of those who watched civilization expand from above. From the quiet depths of ancient ritual life, the world gradually widened to reveal another realm, one shaped by authority, influence, and a degree of comfort unknown to the laborers who moved steadily through the fields and workshops. In the earliest cities, the structure of society rose gently, layer by layer, forming a hierarchy that mirrored the physical layout of the settlements themselves. At the center stood the temples, administrative courts, and broad homes of those whose responsibilities positioned them at the upper edge of daily life. Their existence unfolded within calmer walls, shaded courtyards, and spaces where decisions flowed outward into the lives of many. These dwellings differed immediately from the modest rooms of ordinary workers. Built from thicker bricks and placed in locations where breezes drifted more freely, the homes of the elite offered quiet refuge from the pressures of heat and dust. Inner courtyards opened into skylit chambers where pale sunlight filtered down in softened beams, illuminating surfaces polished through years of gentle use. Clay vessels filled with scented oils stood along stone shelves. Woven mats lay in orderly patterns across floors, and small decorative artifacts rested in alcoves carved with careful precision. Each element contributed to an atmosphere of composed stillness, a contrast to the bustling energy of workshops and fields. The daily rhythms of these households unfolded with their own understated structure. Soft footsteps moved across shaded corridors as stewards recorded inventories of grain, textiles, and traded goods. In antechambers, scribes arranged clay tablets upon low tables, their reed styluses creating faint, deliberate impressions that captured the flow of resources within the household. The scent of ink, clay, and stored grain mingled in the quiet air, while subtle murmurs drifted from adjoining rooms where attendants prepared morning meals or sorted items needed for the day's functions. Meals for the elite offered a gentle display of abundance. Baskets of bread, bowls of dried fruits, and vessels filled with lightly seasoned stews were arranged on low tables. Milk and oil, gathered from herds maintained by distant laborers, provided richness to dishes served in clay or bronze containers. The atmosphere remained calm rather than extravagant. Food served not as spectacle, but as part of a long-standing rhythm of comfort and order maintained through generations. Attendants moved with practiced grace, refilling vessels or adjusting the arrangement of dishes without disturbing the quiet harmony of the room. Administrative responsibilities occupied a central place in the lives of the elite. In rooms lined with tablets and scrolls, officials reviewed rations, land allocations, and ceremonial requirements. Discussions unfolded in low, steady tones, shaped by the measured cadence of planning. Decisions regarding water distribution, communal projects, or temple maintenance required careful coordination, and these tasks gave structure to each day. Though removed from physical labor, the elite bore the responsibility of maintaining balance within the city, ensuring that fields received water at proper intervals, that storerooms remained sufficiently supplied, and that the temples held materials needed for daily rituals. These administrative duties extended into the realm of justice, where disputes over land, trade, or household responsibilities were settled through quiet deliberation. Records preserved in clay revealed the tone of these proceedings, formal, calm, and guided by tradition. The presence of seated officials, each representing a link between spiritual authority and civic governance, lent weight to decisions that shaped the lives of countless individuals. Their role, though elevated, remained firmly tied to the structure of society below, reflecting the interconnectedness of all levels of ancient life. Within temple institutions, elite priests and priestesses held positions of profound influence. Their responsibilities included interpreting signs, maintaining ritual spaces, and ensuring the correct performance of ceremonies believed to sustain the harmony of the world. Their days unfolded within sacred precincts, where shadows danced across carved walls, and the faint aroma of fragrant resins drifted through quiet halls. The soundscape of these spaces included soft chanting, the delicate clink of ceremonial vessels, and the hushed movement of attendants preparing for rituals conducted according to traditions older than the written word. Temple gardens offered pockets of tranquility reserved for contemplation or preparation. These gardens contained small pools fed by diverted water channels, shaded by trees whose leaves rustled gently in warm breezes. The presence of birds drawn by fruit-bearing branches or still water added movement to the otherwise serene atmosphere. Priests wandered these paths during moments of reflection, their footsteps barely disturbing the fine dust accumulated on stone walkways. The gardens represented more than beauty. They symbolized order, purity, and the connection between earthly life and the divine. Trade connected the elite to regions far beyond their own settlements. Caravans delivered copper, lapis lazuli, timber, and precious stones, all destined for temples, workshops, or private collection rooms. In large storage chambers, attendants cataloged these goods with care. The deep blue of lapis, the warm luster of polished wood, and the pale sheen of alabaster added subtle color to an otherwise earthy palette of early architecture. These items were not displayed openly, but kept in protected spaces where their presence signified ties to distant lands and the quiet wealth accumulated through generations of careful trade. Musicians, storytellers, and skilled artisans occasionally visited elite households, offering services that enriched the quiet rhythms of daily life. The music played on reed pipes or lyres drifted softly through shaded courtyards, blending with the faint murmur of wind. Stories recited in calm, steady tones carried memories of ancestors, distant kings, or mythical journeys, creating an atmosphere of introspection rather than excitement. Artisans crafted delicate items, beads, combs, carved pendants that contributed to the understated elegance of elite life. These interactions, though infrequent, formed part of a cultural tradition sustained through respect for skill and knowledge. Education within elite families took place in private chambers where young members learned writing, mathematics, and the stories of their people. Clay tablets containing practice symbols rested in baskets alongside styluses and counting stones. Lessons unfolded slowly, guided by tutors who encouraged repetition and careful observation. In these quiet rooms, sunlight filtered through latticed windows, casting patterned shadows upon the floors. The steady work of learning reflected the patience valued within the administrative world, preparing future generations for roles that required thoughtful decision-making. The elite moved through their days with a sense of measured grace, shaped by environments designed to soften the burdens of heat, noise, and labor. Yet their comfort remained deeply connected to the unseen labor of those who sustained the foundations of society. Water channels carved through distant lands, fields tended beneath harsh sunlight, and workshops filled with persistent activity all supported the serene atmosphere within elite compounds. Still, the elite lived in a realm defined not by direct struggle, but by the responsibilities and privileges that came with their station. And as this elevated world maintained its calm rhythm, it gradually revealed connections that extended beyond status or architecture. The beliefs carried by priests, the decisions made by administrators, and the patterns of trade managed by merchants all formed part of a larger web that held the ancient city together. Within this web, the elite represented the guiding structure, shaping the direction of collective life while relying quietly on the efforts that came from below. It was within this intricate balance of comfort and responsibility that another perspective began to take shape, a quieter, broader reflection on how societies expanded, interacted, and evolved through the movements of ideas, goods, and traditions. As the gentle corridors of elite life came into focus and faded softly into the background, the wider forces that connected cities, landscapes, and generations began to rise in gentle clarity, preparing to unfold the next chapter of ancient civilization's story. As the quiet patterns of elite life settled into the background, its shaded courtyards, measured decisions, and gentle comforts, the wider landscape surrounding the ancient city began to come into view once more. Beyond the walls of temples and administrative homes, the world stretched outward in broad expanses of river, plain, and distant hills. The movement of goods, ideas, and traditions between settlements shaped a subtle current that flowed beneath the visible structures of society. This broader rhythm, neither hurried nor dramatic, carried the ancient world forward in soft, steady waves. As the influence of the elite extended into the patterns of trade, belief, and shared knowledge, the gentle connections that bound distant regions together gradually revealed themselves with quiet clarity. Across the plains and valleys that framed the early cities, the landscape itself served as a vast conduit through which culture, resources, and memory traveled. The broad sweep of riverbanks, carved over millennia by patient currents, connected distant settlements in a chain of slow-moving exchange. Boats fashioned from bundled reeds or hollowed timber drifted steadily along these waterways, carrying grain, pottery, woven cloth, and raw materials gathered from remote regions. Their progress followed the rhythm of the river, accompanied by the soft lapping of water against their sides and the distant calls of birds tracing paths overhead. The movement was never hurried. It echoed the measured tone of the world that sustained it. Caravans crossing the open plains contributed another layer to this quiet network. Lines of pack animals moved at deliberate pace across dry, sun-warmed earth, their hooves pressing shallow impressions into the soil. As they advanced, dust lifted gently behind them, lingering in the air before drifting back to the ground in fine, pale layers. The caravans carried copper from mountain mines, timber from river forests, and stones prized for ritual or ornament. Each journey unfolded over many days, punctuated by evenings when fires flickered faintly against the dim horizon. Travelers gathered near these flames, their silhouettes blending with the soft glow, sharing stories shaped more by memory than embellishment. These exchanges fostered a natural diffusion of ideas between distant peoples. Pottery styles that originated in one region appeared centuries later in settlements separated by mountains, Decorative patterns etched into bone tools or carved into stone seals carried familiar curves and symbols, hinting at shared origins or quiet borrowing. Knowledge of irrigation techniques, cultivation methods, and simple metallurgy traveled in similar fashion, passing from one community to another through calm, persistent contact rather than deliberate instruction. The spread of such knowledge shaped the landscape itself, allowing new fields to emerge, canals to form intricate networks, and workshops to adopt improved methods. The environment played a central role in the rhythm of trade. Seasons dictated when rivers rose high enough to carry heavier vessels and when plains dried sufficiently for caravans to cross without becoming mired in soft earth. The sky, with its slow-turning stars and steady cycles, guided travelers moving by night. Winds carried scents from distant regions, pine from northern forests, mineral tones from open deserts, faint sweetness from orchards in fertile valleys. These subtle shifts in air and light informed decisions made by merchants, guiding their movement across the land with gentle consistency. Settlements located along crossroads of trade grew into soft centers of exchange, their marketplaces filled with the muted hum of activity. Stalls shaded by woven mats displayed goods laid out in careful arrangements. Baskets of grain, polished stones, pottery of varied shapes, and textiles woven with intricate patterns. The atmosphere remained calm despite the number of people present. Voices blended into one another, forming a steady murmur carried by warm breezes. The scent of fresh bread mingled with the smoke of small cooking fires, creating an aroma that drifted through the sunlit air. Within these settlements, scribes recorded the flow of goods with the same deliberate precision found in earlier administrative centers. Clay tablets bore lists of items exchanged, taxes collected, and obligations fulfilled. The inscriptions revealed a world where trade and economy followed gentle patterns, maintained through trust, tradition, and the slow accumulation of relationships formed across generations. Merchants returned to the same regions year after year, navigating not only physical paths, but also invisible networks of cooperation that shaped the stability of early commerce. The expansion of trade also influenced religious and symbolic practices. Objects once considered rare, stones from distant mountains, shells from far-off coasts, metals mined from remote hills, became integrated into local ceremonies, altering the character of rituals through new forms of adornment. Temples incorporated materials that carried the quiet echoes of other landscapes. Figurines crafted with imported pigments or decorated with foreign motifs suggested a blending of beliefs, a gentle merging of spiritual traditions shaped by the movement of goods and ideas. Trade routes carried stories as surely as they carried physical materials. Traveling merchants recounted descriptions of distant regions, deserts where the wind carved rippling patterns across dunes, forests filled with deep shade and unfamiliar voices, and mountain ranges where cold air whispered across jagged stones. These narratives traveled further than the merchants themselves, passed along through fireside retellings, entering the collective memory of communities that might never see such places. These stories blended slowly with local traditions, adding faint color to myths or influencing the way landscapes were imagined. Over time, as the world expanded through commerce, societies developed new methods for stabilizing these connections. Way stations emerged along trade routes, offering rest and water to caravans. Wells were dug in strategic locations, providing relief from long stretches of open terrain. Modest shrines were constructed along paths, offering travelers a place to leave tokens of thanks or to seek safe passage. These structures, often simple and unadorned, marked the steady movement of people across the land with a quiet regularity that mirrored the passage of seasons. The growth of regional exchange led to subtle advancements in technology. Tools used for measurement became more refined, allowing grain to be distributed more evenly and trade to be conducted with consistent fairness. Boats grew sturdier, shaped to carry heavier loads across wider rivers. Pack saddles were improved to ease the burden on animals during long journeys. These innovations developed gradually, the result of accumulated experience rather than sudden invention. Each improvement reflected countless trials carried out by individuals, working in calm persistence, adjusting materials until they met the needs of the world around them. The natural environment responded to these changes in ways both gentle and profound. Fields expanded along riverbanks, their borders defined by dikes shaped through collective labor. Orchards grew along trade routes, providing food and shade for passing travelers. Dust from caravans settled into soil, bringing with it microscopic traces of distant regions. Rivers shifted slowly under the weight of new boats, carving channels that adapted to the changing demands of early commerce. In this way, the landscape itself became a living memory of ancient exchange, shaped by the quiet movement of goods and people across centuries. And through all these transformations, the character of early trade remained steady. Nothing unfolded with haste. The world expanded through soft accumulation rather than sudden reach, its paths shaped by patient footsteps and drifting currents. The vast web of connections formed not through dramatic conquests, but through quiet endurance, mirroring the calm rhythms that defined life within the earliest civilizations. As these expansive patterns settled into view with gentle clarity, another perspective slowly emerged, a broader reflection on how the forces of labor, belief, hierarchy, and exchange intertwined across generations. Together, they formed an enduring mosaic through which ancient societies understood themselves, their world, and the slow passage of time that carried them forward. The widening networks of exchange continued to shape the ancient world in ways that unfolded gently across generations. Patterns of movement etched themselves into the land so gradually that they became indistinguishable from the landscape itself. Paths worn by countless footsteps deepened into enduring lines across plains, their edges softened by wind and time. Riverbanks shifted subtly with each passing season, carrying sediments from faraway mountains that eventually settled into new fields and fertile deltas. These changes occurred quietly, without sudden transformation, mirroring the unhurried pace that governed daily life. Objects that traveled along these routes often found new meaning far from their origins. A polished stone carried from a distant mountain range might be placed in a household shrine, valued not for its rarity, but for its unusual color or smooth texture. A piece of pottery with unfamiliar patterns might inspire local artisans to alter their own designs, blending foreign motifs with traditional forms. Over time, these small adaptations accumulated, gently reshaping the cultural identity of entire regions without erasing the traditions that had guided generations. In the calm spaces between settlements, Traders sometimes paused at shelters built from branches, reeds, or stones, their simple forms blending naturally into the surrounding terrain. These resting places offered brief sanctuary from sun or wind, allowing travelers to sit quietly while the landscape stretched in muted tones on all sides. Stories, goods, and quiet observations passed between them, forming bonds that endured long after the travelers resumed their journeys. Even the remnants of these shelters, scattered stones, faint outlines of fire pits, fragments of broken vessels, became part of the archaeological record, silent markers of the world's gradual interconnection. As goods moved outward from the heart of communities, ideas also drifted with them. Observations of stars made near coastlines influenced calendars far inland. Techniques for shaping clay evolved as potters encountered new forms along trade routes. Ritual practices absorbed subtle elements borrowed from distant traditions, blending them into ceremonies that continued to unfold beneath the soft glow of firelight. Through this exchange, culture expanded not through disruption, but through the gentle, persistent influence of contact maintained over many lifetimes. And as these layers of movement, memory, and quiet transformation settled into their place within early civilization, the landscape began to offer a broader reflection. A deeper understanding emerged of how societies were shaped not only by labor, hierarchy, belief, or exchange, but by the enduring patterns that connected all of these elements across generations. In this widening view, the ancient world appeared as a continuous tapestry woven from countless subtle threads, each contributing to the calm unfolding of history. From this expanding perspective, a more contemplative picture slowly came into focus, one shaped by the universal passage of time, the rise and fading of civilizations, and the enduring search for meaning woven through every era. As the world of early trade and connection receded gently into stillness, the deeper reflections waiting at the edges of memory began to emerge with soft, unhurried clarity, preparing to guide the story toward its quiet conclusion. Across the long arc of early civilization, the patterns of life settled into a calm continuity shaped by labor, belief, hierarchy, and the gentle movement of goods and ideas through shifting landscapes. As centuries unfolded, these patterns repeated themselves in subtle variations, reflecting the enduring nature of human communities as they adapted to changing environments while holding closely to traditions shaped by long memory. The world that emerged from these rhythms was neither uniform nor fragmented, but rested in a balance created by countless small influences lingering across generations. In the earliest settlements, faint traces of these rhythms appeared in the arrangements of dwellings, the placement of ritual spaces, and the quiet consistency of domestic routines. Shadows cast by morning light revealed the contours of shared courtyards and paths that connected households in a web of daily interaction. Sounds drifted across open spaces in soft currents, voices blending with the murmur of distant water channels, the gentle clatter of pottery, and the soothing rustle of vegetation stirred by wind. Through these simple, repetitive motions, the earliest communities shaped an environment defined not by urgency, but by enduring steadiness. As societies matured, the same quiet patterns extended into broader regions. Fields expanded along riverbanks in measured increments. Temples grew slowly, their foundations laid by hands guided by inherited knowledge. Administrative centers accumulated layers of tablets, vessels, and tools, each contributing to a history inscribed through continuity rather than sudden events. Even the larger cities that later rose from these humble origins carried echoes of their predecessors, echoes preserved in the alignment of streets, the position of gates, and the placement of communal spaces where gatherings unfolded in calm ritual. The people who lived within these expanding worlds moved through time with a patience shaped by the cyclical nature of their environment. Labor followed the rise and fall of seasons. Rituals marked the transition of celestial bodies across the sky. Trade routes opened and closed with changes in climate or shifting political ties, but their underlying structure persisted, allowing knowledge and resources to flow across vast landscapes with unhurried persistence. Generations passed beneath the same stars, living within patterns that felt stable even as subtle transformations rippled through distant regions. Through this slow continuity, the cultural fabric of early societies deepened. Stories told around hearths gained layers as they passed from elders to children. Symbols carved into stone or etched onto clay evolved gradually, capturing beliefs shaped by centuries of observation. Songs adapted to the rhythms of communal life drifted upward in courtyards, echoing faintly against walls that had witnessed countless such gatherings. Each new generation inherited a world already shaped by these gentle patterns, adding its own contributions in equally understated ways. Even the forces that reshaped the ancient world, floods, droughts, migration, or shifting political boundaries, tended to unfold with a sense of inevitability, shaped by the slow passage of time. Communities adapted by adjusting farming practices, altering the structure of dwellings, or moving along trade routes that had guided earlier migrations. These adaptations rarely disrupted the deeper rhythms that defined early civilization. Rather, they blended into the ongoing story, becoming part of the same tapestry that connected distant eras through shared experiences of labor, belief, and community. The quiet endurance of these ancient patterns revealed something essential about the foundation of human history. Beneath the monumental achievements and dramatic events often highlighted in later accounts lay a world shaped primarily by ordinary lives lived with consistency and care. The foundations of cities, the origins of spiritual practices, and the emergence of governance all rested upon routines carried out by countless individuals whose names were never recorded, but whose efforts supported the structure of their societies in ways that reached far beyond their lifetimes. Archaeology later revealed these truths with gentle clarity. Excavated dwellings showed evidence of repeated repairs, suggesting a commitment to preserving familiar spaces through changing generations. Storage rooms filled with vessels of similar shapes indicated stable systems of measurement and distribution. Layers of hearth ash preserved traces of meals shared across centuries. Burial grounds revealed customs that maintained continuity even as beliefs subtly evolved. These discoveries illuminated the steady persistence of life in ancient times, revealing a world defined more by endurance than by disruption. The landscape itself preserved this quiet continuity. Terraces carved into hillsides endured long after their builders departed. Irrigation canals carved into riverbanks remained etched into the earth, their outlines visible even after water ceased to flow through them. Footpaths worn into the ground by ancient travelers lingered beneath layers of soil, their direction still evident long after their purpose had faded. These enduring marks served as reminders of how strongly early societies were connected to their environment, shaping it through patient labor that echoed across centuries. As history progressed, these early patterns formed the groundwork for later civilizations, influencing the rise of more complex societies in ways that were subtle yet profound. The organization of early cities shaped the layout of future capitals. Methods of record-keeping developed in those quiet administrative rooms guided the evolution of writing throughout the ancient world. Rituals performed in modest courtyards influenced the grandeur of later ceremonies conducted in vast temples. Even the rhythms of trade that first connected simple settlements laid the groundwork for the expansive networks that would later span continents. In the long sweep of history, these early developments might appear faint, overshadowed by the monumental achievements that came later. Yet their quiet endurance formed the essential framework upon which all future progress rested. Without the steady labor of farmers, the patient record-keeping of scribes, the calm oversight of administrators, and the gentle persistence of rituals woven into daily life, the great civilizations of later eras could not have taken shape. These early patterns offered stability, continuity, and meaning, guiding humanity through its earliest transitions from wandering groups to settled communities. As the story of these ancient worlds settles into stillness, a broader reflection emerges, one shaped by the delicate balance between change and continuity that has guided human life across millennia. The earliest societies thrived not through sudden transformations, but through the patient accumulation of knowledge, the gentle adaptation to new circumstances, and the enduring strength of shared traditions. Their world was shaped by countless small actions carried out in steady rhythm, forming a foundation that allowed later generations to explore, create, and expand. In this quiet reflection, the ancient world appears not as a distant realm defined by hardship alone, but as a place where life unfolded with steady purpose beneath the soft rise and fall of celestial cycles. The rhythms of labor, belief, and exchange carried communities through generations, offering a sense of continuity that echoed through time. And though the traces of these early lives now lie buried beneath layers of earth and memory, their presence remains woven into the fabric of history, shaping the world that followed with gentle, enduring influence. As the light of this ancient story fades softly, the patterns that shaped the first civilizations linger like distant echoes, subtle, persistent, and deeply human, reminding the world that history's foundation rests upon the quiet endurance of countless forgotten lives. In the quiet that follows the long unfolding of ancient history, the early world settles once more into the stillness from which it first emerged. The faint outlines of settlements, fields, and distant trade paths soften into the background of memory. The rhythms that shaped the first communities drift into silence, like embers fading in the calm air of a settling evening. All that remains is the lingering sense of endurance carried through countless generations, a reminder of how humanity learned to build, adapt, and persist through the slow passage of time. As dusk gathers across the imagined landscape of early civilization, the scenes of labor, ritual, and quiet exchange recede into a gentle twilight. The fields once marked by steady hands become wide, muted expanses touched only by the soft glow of fading light. The courtyards where stories and decisions once unfolded fall into deepening shadow. The riverbanks that carried goods and memory alike reflect the last traces of a calm sky, their currents moving with the same unhurried rhythm that has guided them since the earliest days. The echoes of ancient belief linger in the stillness, not as grand proclamations, but as subtle impressions carried forward through habit, tradition, and the quiet need to understand the world. The symbols carved into stone, the faint outlines of temples, and the weathered figurines once held in reverence feel distant yet enduring, holding their place within the great arc of time. Their meanings drift softly, neither completely known nor fully lost, suspended in the gentle fog of history. The homes of the elite, with their shaded corridors and careful order, fade into a calm obscurity, blending with the surrounding earth and sky. The tools of scribes, the records of harvests, the traces of trade, all settle like dust returning to the ground, carrying with them a sense of completion. The expansive roots that once connected distant regions become quiet lines, stretching through the imagination, their paths continuing onward, even as their earlier travelers fall silent. Across this vast landscape of memory, the early world closes its chapter with the same steadiness that shaped its rise. Nothing ends abruptly. Everything simply drifts into stillness, carried by the natural pace of a story that has always moved in slow, measured waves. The endurance of ancient communities lingers as a calm reminder of continuity, the steady thread that binds past to present through the quiet strength of ordinary lives. In this final reflection, the first traces of civilization settle into a peaceful glow, neither lost nor forgotten, but resting gently within the vast expanse of time. Their presence remains like distant constellations observed through a clear night sky, constant, enduring, and softly illuminating the path that history has taken. As the ancient world withdraws into silence, the story concludes in tranquil balance, allowing the weight of centuries to dissolve into calm darkness. And in that settling quiet, the long journey through the origins of early life, labor, belief, and connection comes to rest, leaving only the faintest echo of the civilizations that once rose and faded beneath the turning arc of time. Their memory lingers as a gentle whisper across the ages, carrying with it a final, restful sense of completion as the night deepens and the world grows still.